Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Hammer and Umpire Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Kevin Weber. I've got a bit of a regular episode this time. I know my last couple of episodes have been Zoom recordings that I've shared with you, and it seems like a lot of you have found those to be helpful and interesting in some ways. But I've finally figured out a way that I can put together my more traditional podcast that a lot of you have grown to expect, I guess. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking about 2025 baseball rules changes, and I'm going to talk about a couple of questions by Mr. Ordway, who always sends me some questions, and one of the local umpires I have here, Scott, who I'll mention later, and also some listener feedback that I've gotten. I get some messages from different people, either via Facebook in some fashion or an email, which I always appreciate, and I urge all of you to send me whatever you got. I always read it and try to do whatever I can with it, either reply in some fashion on the show, or maybe I'll reply to you in writing as well. So, like I said, I know it's been an up and down thing the last, I guess, and I've been inconsistent with the podcast. Life gets in the way. I'm a full-time teacher, and I like to travel, and I got lots of other things happening as well, but I'm always thinking about this podcast, and as baseball season gets going, it's definitely something that I think about quite a bit. But with the format that I put this podcast on, it's become a little bit easier. I figured out a couple ways that I can get my recordings and be able to edit them a bit and piece everything together in a pretty user-friendly way. They changed everything around on the Spotify for podcasters a little while back. They used to have recording things on the app, and they got rid of all of it. So that's what I used to use, and so that wasn't cool. And then I did a couple of other things, but I didn't really like the way it was going, and it was just a little bit more work than I liked. It is work to do this podcast, but sometimes when it's more of a chore, then you're less likely to do it. So I think I figured out a few ways. It's not as easy as it was before, but it's much easier. I'm getting a little older, but I'm still decent as far as technology comes, and I can figure out new things, but I don't like it to be overbearing, and that's what it was a little bit before, the other ways I was doing it. So that's probably why I haven't put out as many podcasts as some of you maybe would like. So there you go. Now, I've also been very busy with umpire training because for my local association here in West Michigan, I'm the varsity assigner. I assign for the 42 schools around this area, but I also lead all the training for the umpires, beginning usually in January and then wrapping up in early March. And we do several meetings. We do some in-person meetings. We do Zoom meetings. We do some training sessions. We have a clinic that we have coming up next weekend, actually, here the 15th, that we have quite a few great instructors lined up, including a couple major league umpires. So that keeps me busy. I've also created this year an online learning platform. In my school, when I teach, I use the Canvas platform. It's similar. Some of you might know Google Classroom. Well, Canvas is like that. It's a learning management system, but it's better. The school pays for it, but there is a free version which I use, and I've created this big page for my umpires that I train, which is, we've got well over 100 baseball umpires in my association. So I've got quizzes and videos and, informational pages and all kinds of stuff on there, and that's what I use to instruct, whether it be in person or on the Zoom. And it's been pretty good. It's still a work in progress. I've got a lot of it built already. If you are interested, I'd be happy to invite you. You just have to let me know the email, and you could check it out. It's all free and everything. But that's what I use. And I like to have a certain curriculum of what I do, and that's what I've created. Hopefully, when somebody else takes over doing the baseball director and the training, which will happen sometime because I'm not going to do it forever, they will have access to that and they can use whatever they might want. So that's the idea. Anyway, I'm happy to be back on. I'm happy to have a new, more traditional episode for you. And I hope to try to put out, my goal is always to try to put out one episode a month. That's what I'm going to try to do here, at least hopefully for the next few months. We'll see how it goes. And you guys can sit back and listen to another episode of the Hammer and Umpire Podcast. I received an email from longtime listener Scott Ordway, and I appreciate that, Scott. Thanks once again. His email read, "Hi, Kevin. I have enjoyed listening to your association meeting recordings. Thank you for uploading those. And here are my questions for the podcast. 1, for plays at the plate, when do you want to be first baseline extended and when do you want to be third baseline extended? 2, on a train wreck play at first where there is a collision and you really cannot tell if it was obstruction or interference, might it be correct that it is nothing? And 3, do you find a big difference between umpiring on a turf field versus a grass field? I find that there are some big pros and cons. What is your take? Thanks as always, Scott Ordway." Well, thank you, Scott. Well, for number 1 there on the first base line versus third base line for plays at the plate, I believe if you're working the wedge, then you should naturally end up either first baseline or third baseline, or sometimes in front of the plate. It seems to be that a lot of plays end up being third baseline extended. If we're working the wedge, which I've talked about on this podcast, and there's lots of videos and things out there for people to discover, 99% of our catchers are right-handed, which is good because if you've had a left-handed catcher, that can be tricky. But nonetheless, you want to stay on their glove side hip and move with them, as they usually are going to make a type of swipe tag nowadays. We don't really have people running people over anymore, which is good. Anyway, if you're moving with them, you'll end up either third baseline extended, maybe you're in front of the plate. If it's a certain type of play and you're moving, you might end up first baseline extended. It seems like first baseline extended frequently, you end up getting blocked out a little bit more. All right, so that's not always the best spot to be. There are some plays that it is a good spot, but more often than not, it's not. So work the wedge and you'll end up where you're supposed to be. That's basically what I'm saying there. All right, but I do find that third baseline extended seems to be where you end up a lot, or somewhere more toward the first base line even, okay? Second question about the train wreck play at first. Yeah, that can definitely happen. You can definitely have a nothing play. It's not obstruction or interference. If it happens all at the same time, the ball kind of arrives and the first baseman's trying to make a play and the runner is just running where he's supposed to and he's just trying to get to the base, and boom, they run into each other. Yeah, that's just kind of what it is. I mean, in order for it to be obstruction, then the first baseman's got to basically be there blocking the base path of the runner without the ball. If he's in the act of making a play or trying to field the ball, that doesn't count, all right? For the runner to be called for interference, then he's got to be there trying to stop, in your estimation anyway, in your judgment, stop the first baseman from making a play on the ball, which he's not really trying to do. I mean, now if he's reaching out and trying to grab something out of the glove, yeah, that could be interference. If the first baseman's standing there and there's no way that he can make a play, or he doesn't have the ball and he kind of runs into the runner, well, yeah, you might have that. But more often than not, if they're both doing what they're supposed to do, then you probably have nothing. And more often than not, it seems like that seems to favor the runner, because if it is a big collision, they usually don't hold on to the ball. All right. And then your third question is about turf versus grass fields. Now, if I'm watching a baseball game, I like watching a baseball game on a grass field. I'm more of a purist that way. I like a well-manicured field. And yeah, I certainly like to umpire in a well-manicured grass field too, but those are few and far between for most of us. I've had a few opportunities to do that, but only a few. If you're just, working high school ball or something even below that, and you're on a grass field, it's probably not the most well-manicured field frequently. Even a nice high school field isn't. I like turf fields because the lines are always where they're supposed to be. They're nice and thick. The batter's boxes are always there the whole game. Even the catcher's box is there. The runner's lane is there. Everything is where it's supposed to be. It's very clear, and I like that. It's easy. You usually get good hops on the turf so players can make plays. You don't get some ball hitting some pebble and going over the shortstop's shoulder or almost hitting him in the cheek or something like that. Of course, on turf, you could get more inside the park home runs or triples by balls up the gap or down the lines because it might play a little bit faster, but that doesn't really bother me. That's okay. You got to watch it with guys sliding, especially when it's a little bit wet out because they might overslide the base, so you got to have your timing working for yourself and not being too quick on things. But in general, I like working games on turf and I like to watch games that are on grass. But if you want to put me in a nice minor league park or something with some really good grass, which I've had a couple opportunities to work at some nice places like that, then that's fine too. I can do that. I also like turf because my shoes don't get all muddy or dirty or dusty and stuff too. So I do appreciate that as well. So once again, I appreciate the question, Scott. Hopefully that kind of gives you some insight and answers your question. And keep it coming because I appreciate insights that you give the podcast. So since last year, I've been the baseball director of my local high school association, the West Michigan Umpire Association, the WMUA. And some of you have seen the recordings I put on the podcast from some of our training meetings, our Zoom training meetings. Just thought that people might like those. And I get questions from different umpires as well. I mean, I've got a training page that I have. It's through Canvas, which is like a learning platform, which I'd be happy to share with people if you were interested to be able to check out. So particularly from newer umpires, I get some questions about whatever issues. And I got one from one of our newer umpires, Scott, which I thought was a pretty good question, and I thought I'd share that with you. So he wrote me an email, and he said, Kevin, batter runner hits a home run and misses home plate. One of the teammates that came out to celebrate realizes he missed the plate, grabs him and pushes him back to have him touch the plate. Since this is a dead ball situation, is this a no call, run counts, or is this an out? Of course, we're talking high school rules here, so it can, some things could be slightly different, with different rule sets, right? So I responded back to Scott, and this is what I wrote to him. I said, Scott, good question. A runner who misses the plate after overrunning or oversliding it may return to touch it. That's, NFHS Rule 8.2 note. If the runner immediately makes an effort to touch the plate, he's out only when he is tagged. If he starts toward the dugout or his position, he's out when he is tagged or the plate is tagged and appealed. Under NFHS rules only, such a runner cannot return since he enters the dugout, which is 822M. Also, a runner who misses the plate cannot return once a following runner has scored. Third out does not preclude a return, as an appeal can be made anytime before the defensive team leaves the field. So that means that before the pitcher and all fielders have crossed the foul lines and before the catcher has left his position on the way to the bench. The run counts unless a proper appeal is made. Either the plate or the runner can be tagged on the appeal, and that's, NFHS 8.2 penalty. So then Scott wrote back, thanks, Kevin. So we do not have to worry about a teammate, quote, offensively assisting in this situation, and the run counts. And so, my interpretation of it, as I put to him, was that once a runner passes the plate, he gets credit for reaching it. And, the interpretation is that the runner's entire body must pass the entire base. So in that case, his run counts unless a proper appeal is made. So even though he was assisted and touched the plate, if a proper appeal is made, he still should be declared out. Therefore, the assistance doesn't really matter. And if anything, it clues the defense that he missed the plate, which might prompt them to actually make the appeal when they maybe did not. Basically reply back saying thanks for the clarification. So that's my take on that situation. I think it's a pretty unique situation that some of you might find interesting. So I thought I'd share it with you, and I thank Scott if he happens to listen to the podcast for that particular question. But it could be a little bit of a tricky situation, definitely a unique situation that would not come about very often, but one that you'd want to get right if it did happen. So there you go. If you have any questions or comments about that, shoot them my way. Let's discuss some of 2025 NCAA rule changes, and there are several, and they've been doing quite a bit of training, video training, that is, for those changes this year. The first one is about electronic devices. And basically with this rule, they're just trying to get it so that it's a little bit easier for coaches to, call plays, that they're not necessarily just restricted from doing so from the dugout, that they could do so from a coach's box or something like that. So the language regarding it is designed for one-way communication, has been changed so that the device is now permitted to be used from the dugout, coach's box, or a position player on the field for the purpose of relaying a pitch or play call. So the rule book previously just allowed for it to be used from the dugout to the field. So that's probably a good change. Pretty solid. We'll just have to monitor that. But there's, less to monitor, I guess. All right. One of the other big changes, and the next one, is pitching violations with foreign substances. We've seen the increase of that happening in professional baseball, and I'm sure all of you watch professional baseball, Major League Baseball in particular, and you see the pitchers get checked when they're exiting the field. So Rule 92E in the NCAA rule book says that it's a violation for pitchers to possess or have any foreign substance on their person. And the penalty for this violation has been changed to require the ejection of both the pitcher and the head coach. Previously, it was just the pitcher that was subject to ejection, since, he is the person that violated the rule, right? So again, the rationale is to increase the penalty to align with NCAA Baseball Code of Ethics and the expectation of full compliance with the intent and spirit of the rules. It's got a little bit more bite to it, I guess. It's kind of like the anthem standoff situation where the violating players and their head coach are ejected because, it's unsportsmanlike, really. So again, if it's like the catcher on his equipment putting a foreign substance on the ball and then giving it to the pitcher, then it's going to be the head coach and the pitcher ejected, not the catcher. I know that seems a little crazy, but that is what the rule reads, and there's rationale behind that, so I get it. But it's a little strange for sure. They had that on the rules test, all right? Also, the next thing is there's a pitch clock in college baseball for my people that don't work it, and technically there's a pitch clock in high school baseball too, but it's not visible or anything like that. So there's two changes that have been made to it regarding the administration of the 20-second action clock. That's when the pitcher is supposed to begin pitching within the 20 seconds, and the hitter is now supposed to be alert and ready to hit within 8 seconds left on that clock. It used to be 10 seconds. So the first batters must now be in the batter's box alert and ready to hit with 8 or more seconds remaining. Previously, like I said, it was just 10 seconds. The 2-second change promotes the safety of hitters by not requiring them to be alert to the pitcher so early and for so long in the sequence of the 20-second clock. That seems like a pretty good change. However, we all had to get either get or figure out how to reprogram our little box timers that we have so that it would go off at 8 seconds. So, $25 for that if you want to send it in, I guess. Second rule language has been added to address when a pitcher starts a preliminary motion or motion to deliver a pitch before the batter is alert and ready to hit. On a first occurrence, the plate umpire shall call time and issue a warning. A pitcher shall receive only one warning. With no runners on base, the warning is assessed, and any subsequent violations result in a ball being awarded to the batter. With anybody on base, the initial warning also serves as one reset for that at-bat, and any subsequent violations result in a ball being awarded to the batter. This is good because pitchers definitely were trying to skirt the rule a bit and get an advantage and maybe try to do some kind of a quick pitch. And, of course, that's not in the spirit of the rule either. So probably a good change there. So we used to have a batter's box rule, which was Rule 7.1D and 7.1E in college baseball. But with the new pitch clock rules and such things, that doesn't really, they're supposed to be in the batter's box, and there's only certain times they can come out of the batter's box and all this other kind of stuff if you read through the rule. Anyway, with the rules related to action clocks, changes and such, the timing requirements make it kind of obsolete. So they got rid of some of that stuff. Also, another rule change, Division I, II, and III baseball committees now have the option to permit the use of a double first base in their respective postseason tournaments. And also, like NCAA D1 baseball, and I think the other levels too, for that matter, can have that in their regular season games if they choose to do so. But there's a whole bunch of rules that we've been going through that would that are different. I mean, it's like, oh yeah, that's good. It's better safety, which it is. I mean, it's a good idea. But like, okay, well, you got the color part of the base, you got the white base, over this part it's fair, over that part it's not. If the runner touches the white part, not the color part, then he didn't really touch it, so it's like he didn't touch the base. He's supposed to, what happens if he purposely touches the white part of the base on the ground ball, the shortstop? Well, then it's like he didn't touch it, and there's all these things that go with it, which they all make some pretty good sense, I'd say, but we've all had to learn those things. Also, like a errant pitch, like a drop third strike gets by the catcher, like rolls, let's say, toward the first base dugout. Well, then all bets are a little bit off as long as somebody's not trying to purposely interfere. You can touch either base, whatever works, and both the fielder and the runner can go for either side of the base that seems like the appropriate thing for that situation. So there's a whole set of rules for that now. It'll be interesting to try to work some of those. I don't know if I'll encounter that this year. Hopefully I'll get to work some kind of postseason, maybe, at Division III or something, and maybe they'll be using it there. I don't know. I don't know if I'll have that in any of my Division I games that I have this year, if they'll be using that. That would be interesting if they do. But, I'll let you know about it in a future podcast if I come across it. They've been doing bat testing for a long time in college baseball to make sure people aren't using illegal bats, that can give them an unfair advantage. And they have these stickers that they put on there. And now the sticker's supposed to be on the lineup card when you come up to the plate meeting. If not, we got to go look at it, make note of it. Also, now they, for Division I baseball, they're supposed to do the bat testing before every day of competition. But now they allow the Division II and III to just do it for their series or such things. They don't have as many resources down there. So that makes a little bit more sense. We had a situation here in our Division III league in Michigan, which we had a kind of a brawl situation last year, late in the season. And I don't need to go into detail about that. I mean, I know the teams and the umpires involved, but I wasn't involved personally. But anyway, the way the rule book read is if you leave your position, and it doesn't matter if you go engage in the fight or whatever it might be, then you're ejected. I mean, that's the way the rule is read for a long time. And I understand the reasoning behind that because you just want players hey, just stay where you're at. Don't be going over there, that kind of stuff. But, sometimes players just naturally kind of leave a certain area or maybe only take a few steps. That's all it really took, and you get ejected. And it seemed a little bit unfair and a little bit harsh. So they put in some new language this year for ejections. The new language has been added to the fight rule, stipulates that players already on the field and in the vicinity of a potential altercation will not be penalized if they are judged not to be participating or escalating or inciting the altercation. So that just makes perfect sense, all right? Team personnel who leave their positions to go to the vicinity or participate or incite an altercation will, of course, continue to be subject to ejection. So it gives a little bit more leeway to those kind of situations. And I think that's probably a good change. All right. And then they also changed it a little bit for relief pitchers. It used to be if you're a pitcher and you get ejected, it's 4 games. Whether you're a starting pitcher, relief pitcher, whatever, if that's your last position listed. But now relief pitcher that gets ejected is 2 games, which is, they're a little bit more, in the rationale is that they're a little bit more like a regular player, because they can participate several times a week, not just, once every 5 days or whatever it might be. So that makes some sense, all right? So those are some of the big changes. I mean, they had another one where a batter becomes a base runner, and they had some language clarification on that, but that wasn't necessarily a super significant one as well. And then they also talked about the forced play slide rule. This is kind of a bigger one. We now have to, because of potential replay, which, really only affects people with, a bunch of Division I games that, might have replay. So if you're working a JUCO game or, a lower level kind of game, which there's nothing wrong with those, but, you don't really have replay too often. But anyway, it can go to replay and they can say that it was or wasn't a first play slide rule, and the guy might have been safer out at first base. And so the way it was before is you killed the play, basically. You called time once you had that interference of that first play slide rule. Now they want you to, indicate then that was first play slide rule and let the play kind of finish and not call time. And then if it is needed to be corrected via replay, then you have that opportunity to do so. So that's going to be something that is going to be a big change for a lot of people, because the way you call that has been something that a lot of umpires have done for many, 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 many years. But we'll see how it goes. So that's the idea there. You don't want to kill the play. It's supposed to continue after the ruling, so it can be reviewable. Obviously, if you kill it and you're working a junior college game, you're not going to have any replay. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's going to be your call anyway. I mean, you might talk to your partner about it if there's some issue, but it's not like it's going to New York or something, right? So there's that. And then they had a couple other things on pitching positions and pitching violations and such that weren't, something I need to talk about right here. The other thing that they have, though, for a clock situation or clock protocol is that they can have the 150 seconds for warm-ups and not just limit pitchers to 8 throws and things like that. That's either like when a new pitcher comes in, or if it's the 120 seconds, which, I think it was always a disadvantage to those quick working pitchers that like to come out there and whip a few throws in there and get a few in there, or they take a couple from near the front of the mound or something. I don't know. They like to do certain things. They all have their quirks to them. So as long as you get it done in that amount of time, that's fine. The problem is a lot of the clocks in the stadiums don't necessarily set to 150 seconds. Of course, the box timers and things that people have are at 120 seconds. We just got to bring out stopwatches and figure it out, and we'll get it working. But it seems like a good change. It's maybe going to be a little tricky at times to implement it, or not implement it, but just to keep track of it all. But we should be able to do that. All right. So those are some of the big changes coming to college baseball here for 2025. Some of them are pretty good and interesting, particularly the pitch protocols and the first play slide rule one as well. The other one that they're going to have us do that I already kind of alluded to was the foreign substance check on the pitchers. They have a protocol and some videos that have been put out about how you're supposed to go about checking. You're basically checking the top and bottom of the hand, and if there was any other potential place that somebody could have a foreign substance, you can do that, but that's not necessarily required. You're going to check a relief pitcher as soon as he enters the game, when he exits the game, the pitchers at the beginning of the games, and then every so many innings. They have it all set the way that they want us to do this, and some of the conferences are adopting this, and that's probably good, because there's some people that are putting some substances on their hands, so they get those wicked breaking balls, and that's unfair. So that's cheating. But like they say, if you're not cheating, you're not trying, right? That's what these baseball players sometimes think. So it's part of our job, I guess, as umpires, to make sure they're not cheating, and if they do, to look at the rules as they are written and the penalties as they are written and implement them as they are written and do what we got to do. So hopefully that's a little bit interesting for you guys. I know some of you just work high school baseball or other youth league baseball. Maybe it's not so much, but I think so. I mean, that stuff is going to be coming down to other levels in the future as well. Over the past few months, I've gotten some messages from a few different listeners on some, topics, or just giving me some feedback, which I really appreciate. And I wanted to have a little segment here talking about some of those things and letting those people know that I'm not ignoring them. Hopefully they're still listeners, okay? So one of the first ones I got was back in May from Caleb Groom, and he, was going through some of my podcasts, and I've got a good number so far, and he says that he works baseball in Texas, and he's done so for a long time, but, stopped for 16 years as his kids grew up, and now he's doing high school games again in North Carolina, and he says that he appreciates the insight into the Michigan area and stuff like that. I appreciate that too, when I'm able to learn about how things are done in other parts of the country. There's a lot of similarities, but there's also some differences and things that you have to deal with. Obviously, let's say here in Michigan, we have to deal with cold weather at times. We get our hot weather too, but definitely during the spring months, it's definitely cold. But if you're in North Carolina, it's probably hot for a vast majority of the time, and you got to be able to deal with that a little bit better. So those kind of things are kind of interesting to hear about. So I appreciate it, Caleb. I got another message from Joshua Treon, and Josh was talking about how this is the, like the 2024 anyway, was like one of his first years here umpiring. He's a newer person, and dealing with all the new things that you have to figure out as a brand new umpire. And there's a lot of them. Sometimes I guess, as a veteran, and some of us can forget some of those things. As somebody that does a lot of training, I seem to recall them a lot. I'm always thinking about what it's like to be a first 3-year kind of person and what you have to go through and all those kind of questions and things that you have and how you evaluate yourself and know if you're getting better and those kind of things. So he was talking about in his message to me about how he does different things to try to calm his nerves before he does certain games. And all of us get nervous to a point. I mean, I think that the nerves that we might all have is just showing that we care. But sometimes nerves are because, we're apprehensive or we're unsure about ourselves. Our confidence maybe is a little bit down. We want to avoid that. If you're nervous because, it's a significant game and you don't want to screw up or something like that, that's usually why you get nervous. That's fine. But hopefully, as you are dealing with those nerves, you just tell yourself, it's a baseball game and I know what I'm doing, and I'll do the best I can. And, sometimes stuff happens. Even if you're a great umpire, things will happen to you. But hopefully we'll get over that because we're just confident that we can do a good job out there and not do some major screw up that cost somebody the game. Close calls might go one way or the other. Somebody might say you missed it or something like that, but no big faux pas out there. That's what we're trying to avoid, gross misses, as we might say, right? So anyway, he's been going through the podcast as well. He mentioned about, having maybe a segment where I could get some guests on. He kind of volunteered to do that. That'd be a great idea if I could figure that out sometime. I've got some ways I can do guests now on some of the new recording devices that I'm using. So, Josh, if you're still interested, contact me again. Maybe we can set something up and figure out what we might do. And I would open that up to other people out there, too. I mean, it's always great to have other voices on the podcast other than my own, because I certainly can start boring some people, I think. All right. I got another message from Aaron Rubel, and he said, I want to thank you for the effort in putting together such a great podcast. I just started it a few days ago, and I'm listening to it on my commute to and from work. So I appreciate that. And he's been working his fall city leagues, the 7 to 15U. This was, in the last fall here anyway. And he's been around baseball for most of his life and everything. And then he, has had some opportunities where being an official scorer at a AA game and such. And he also mentioned that because he's on one of the episodes where I was talking about Ron Luciano and mentioning him as one of my umpire spotlights, which I've gotten away from a little bit here and there. I should get back to some of those. But anyway, he mentions, the Ron Luciano book, which is a really good read if you've never done that. I think he had a couple of books anyway. And so he kind of mentioned those things and how he's basically still in the 2020. I hope by this time he's moved down a little bit for some of the episodes. And I guess he also used to live in the Detroit area before he moved down to Mobile Bay area of Alabama, which is definitely a little bit different climate and baseball, I'm sure, than what you might get in the Detroit area. So thank you for your feedback, and I'm glad you're enjoying the podcast, Aaron. And then I also got a message from Chad Hester at one point here, this just, way in February of last year, about a year ago. Just wondering if I'm still doing the podcast, which I am, but you know how it is with everything. Sometimes life really does get in the way. So I figured out a few things on how to make this work a little bit easier for me, and I hope I'll be a little bit more consistent, but I'm always saying that, so time will tell. I will always come back and do episodes. It's just a matter of how consistently I do them. That's just what it is. It's not like I'm paying my bills by doing the podcast. So, when it's your job, you got to go do it, right? So that is basically some of the feedback I had gotten recently from some listeners, and I always appreciate that. Please send me messages. You can do it via Facebook. I have my email address on the show notes and such, whatever works for you. And I do read anything that anybody sends to me, and I will do my best to get back with you, or at least mention the topic or something on the next episode if I can work it in. So once again, appreciate all those guys out there that sent me in something, because I know it takes some time. You got to specifically sit down and do that, and I appreciate the effort, and keep working hard out there, fellas. Well, there it is, another episode of the Hammer and Umpire podcast. As always, I appreciate you sticking with me until the very end. I know that sometimes I might have a topic that isn't the most thrilling for you, or maybe applies to you, but if you stick with me to the end, I do think that there's something for everyone in the segments that I give. Even if it's at a level that you don't work, you certainly can get something out of it that might apply to the kind of baseball that you are working at this point. I'm looking forward to the upcoming season. I'm very lucky that I have a very good schedule for my collegiate games. Actually, the best schedule I think I've ever gotten. So hopefully I'm going to go out and knock it out and do a good job and continue to get some schedules like that. But I've learned over the years that nothing is guaranteed in baseball and in umpiring, and you have to reprove yourself every year and do the very best job and take nothing for granted. So that's the way I'm going to go after it. And I hope that I can report back to you at the end of the season that things went very well, and I hope it's my best season ever. So I've got a lot of really good opportunities on the horizon. Hopefully the weather will cooperate with some of them as well. And we'll see how things go as we move into, let's say, the end of May. That's basically when my collegiate season will be wrapping up. Until the next time, though, I hope you guys are getting yourselves ready for this upcoming season, getting yourselves in shape and going and seeing some pitches and doing whatever you can to make sure that you are prepared for this upcoming season that we have. And until then, keep calling strikes.